Boy, I don't know about this group. I was listening to you. I always go in the men's room just before I speak and do research in there, really. And I was listening to some of you talk in there, and one of you, I don't know which one it was, says, what's the difference between working for the Pope and working for my boss? And the other one says, I don't know. What's the difference between working for the Pope and working for your boss? He says, the Pope expects you to kiss his hand. How many of you work for something like that? I hope not. One guy says, one place I went, the boss actually got up and says, I want to get something straight. I'm the boss and you're nothing. And one of the guys says, big deal, boss over nothing. And then another one says, boss. He said, boss. He says, that's a double S-O-B spelled backwards. yes. So, son of a gun. How many of you get along with your boss okay? How many? No, maybe your boss is sitting here. I don't want to put you on the spot. But I started out as a mail boy in Detroit, Michigan at the Grand Trunk Railroad. I was 18 years old. And my job was every morning I had to go to the wire office, the telegraph office, and pick up the wires of the accidents that happened the night before. And almost every morning they'd have a little set of wires. Sometimes they'd have a stack of them. And I'd take the wires to my desk, and I had a desk, and this is before ballpoint pens were invented, and I had a wooden holder with it wasn't a feather, but wooden held, and you put these nibs, these little steel things in, and you dip in there, and I had 2 inkwells on my desk. And the one with the black ink, I'd dip in there and I'd write down the name of the person injured, the location of the accident, what their occupation was, if they were an employee, or if it was a crossing accident or a passenger injury or what. And I'd write that down there. And then I had a red ink. And ever so often I'd dip in the inkwell there with a different pen. And next to some of the names I would write dead. And hardly a week would ever go by that I didn't get the red ink out and write dead. This is before we had crossing protection at most crossings. You know, before they had the gates and all that stuff, the gates were manually operated at very few major highways. That was the only protection you had. A few had little bells ringing. And this is back when they had large families. You know, 6 kids, 7 kids. And so it was not unusual at all on Monday morning for me to take the wire reports, and there'd be a whole family out driving for a Sunday drive in their cars, and a train. They used to go 89 miles an hour back then, and a train would hit the car and kill the whole family, and then Monday morning I'd be in Detroit writing dead, 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 like that. And quite often there were 2 crossing accidents on a weekend, and I'd be writing dead for 2 different sets of families. So it's a horrible thing. This is back before they had personnel departments. How many of you have worked through a personnel department where you have to fill out all those forms and everything? And anyway, what happened back then, there were a class of workers called boomers. And boomers were railroad men who would work in the yards, the switchman, throwing switches and brakemen and that kind of thing. And whenever he wanted to hire, whenever a yard master needed a couple of men, he'd go to into a shanty. They'd have a little shanty in the yard with a pot-bellied stove, and the hobos would hang in there, and the boomers would just get off a boxcar where they came riding into town and stand around there. So just pretend you guys are around, just here, right here, around a pot-bellied stove. He'd say to you, hold up your hands. Would you all hold up both your hands for me? Just hold them right up. And he would look at you, and if you had a couple fingers cut off, he'd hire you. That was a sign of a seasoned brakeman. Back there, couplers were so unsafe. You know, in the 30s and the 20s, the old-timers would have their fingers cut off. And it was not unusual at all if you shake hands with a guy just like that. If he had a couple fingers missing, you're hanging around the rail. Say, how long you been braking? Just an automatic thing, you know. And so it was not unusual for people to be killed on every weekend. It was not unusual for people to have fingers cut off. Now, when I went to work for DuPont Corporation, they hired me at Kinston, North Carolina, the safest plant in the world. That's what They went, are you ready for this? 12 years and 11 months. 12 years and 11 months with 3,000 employees without a lost time injury. 12 years and 11 months, 66,654,000 work hours without a lost time injury. Just mind-boggling. Safest record that was ever compiled by an industry. And finally, a woman walking to her workstation tripped and sprained her ankle, breaking the record. It was a fatal accident. Actually, it was just a sprained ankle. But when the safety committee found out she was going to lose time, they beat her to death. They play hardball there with her safety record. You know, they don't mess around. That isn't true. They just bruised her up a whole lot, really. So anyway, this was a record compiled many years ago, and they had had injuries since then. Now, the day before I got to that plant, a fella was pulling a heavy cart behind him. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me, Jack. He's pulling a heavy cart, and it was a heavier load than usual, and it swung over and hit the guardrail on the side where he was pulling it, and it bounced over, and he had his hand a little bit too far around on the handle, and it just pushed the handle up and cut his little finger off. Actually cut his finger off. Now, the next day, the guy's already back to work. I saw him. He was actually doing gainful work at a station. Didn't lose time because of a finger amputation. But here I am talking to 3,000 employees, and I said, would you raise your hand? How many of you heard about the tragic accident? They all raised their hands. And I said, and how many of you could feel the pain? And they all raised their hands. And I said, and how many of you feel a sense of loss because of this? And they all raised their hands. And I said, this is weird. Here are 3,000 people in mourning because a guy lost his little finger. How far we've come since 1948, when I used to just sit there right dead, 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 shake hands with this guy like this and had a couple fingers over, and that's a brakeman. But how far we've come with safety equipment and with safety rules and with engineering. How far we've come. And yet I still visit plants all the time where people have been killed. Used to get these lousy calls in the middle of the night. One morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, I got a call. And Schoolcraft, Michigan, I went driving out there, find out that a car pulled up to the railroad crossing. The flashing signals were working. The gates were down, US 131. The guy's waiting for the train. A woman in a car going 30 miles an hour comes up behind him, hits his car in the rear end, punches him right through the crossing gate, onto the crossing, just as the train arrived. Train's going 69 miles an hour. Train hits the car, kills the guy. So I talked to the witnesses, you know, I did the regular investigation, talked to the train crew. Everybody says the same thing. The whistle was blowing, the engine bell was, the headlight was on, everything was working perfect. The gates worked, they came down. She's sitting there, she comes up, hits him in the rear end. I'm running around, talking to everybody, getting witnesses. Finally, somebody points out this woman. She's the driver of the other vehicle. And I said, my name's Art Fettig, will you tell me what happened? I got a tape recorder strapped on my back, a little disc we used to use back then, and I put the mic in her mouth, and she says, my husband is going to divorce me. I said, what? She said, my husband is going to divorce me. And I said, let's start over. My name's Art Fettig. I'm claim agent with the Grand Trunk, and would you tell me your name? She gave me her name. And I said, will you tell me what happened? She says, my husband is going to divorce me. I said, let's try it again. I said, where were you going this morning? I was going to town to see my lawyer, but when I got there, I realized it wasn't even 6 o'clock in the morning. So I decided to go home. And I said, and what happened? She said, I have no idea. She said, my husband is going to divorce me. Now, she was so screwed up, so wiped out by a personal problem, she had no idea she'd even had an accident. How many of you have ever been that screwed up? Just raise your hands. 1, 2. Haven't you ever been that screwed up? I'm that way all the time. No, I had an interesting thing. Just like you say, man, how could you be that screwed up, not know you killed somebody? And I had a major in the Air Force. In Battle Creek, Michigan, we have a little National Guard outfit, but he was on active duty. And he said, I saw your film. And you talked about this woman being so screwed up she didn't even know she had an accident. And I thought it was kind of dumb. He said, in fact, I didn't like the whole thing because that stuck in my mind how stupid that was. And he said, I was up, he was a lieutenant colonel, and he was up for promotion to colonel. And he thought he was going to get promoted to the Pentagon. And he had all his hopes on that. And he said, I owe money all over the place, and I figured 5 more years and I'd have it made. You know, I'd have all my bills paid, and I'd have everything straightened out, and my life would be great, and I'd get a good retirement. And he said, I was home, and they called me, and they said, number 1, you didn't get the promotion, and number 2, we're phasing you out. We want you out of the service within 90 days. And he said, shortly after that, I found myself in my pickup truck at the bottom of this culvert, and I had no idea how I got there. I wasn't even aware I'd been driving my pickup truck. I was so wiped out. And he said, I got out and I walked up on the road, and I could see where I lost it, you know, where I hit a patch of ice and I lost it, and I wasn't injured or anything. He said, 30 minutes later, I'd have been flying that plane. And I could have been dead just like that. And he called me up, and we ended up making a video series for the Air Force. I submit to you that probably any one of you could be that screwed up. Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow. I hope not. But it happens. Let me go to this chart a little bit. I want to get a pen here. Let me show you how most companies that I work with work. They go about like this here. They have a safety record that goes like this. Not good, not bad. It goes like this here, up and down. And then for something they can't figure out, no reason at all, they get worse. And they get worse, and they get worse. And they get about here, and quite often the boss, the plant manager, the chief executive officer or something, issues a proclamation from on high to the troops. And he might say something like this. He'll say, from now on, safety is number 1. How many of you ever heard of that? You know, safety is number 1. He says, put that up the flagpole, you know, and see how many people salute it. And everybody says, that's baloney, you know. And so, they say, well, get us better safety equipment, you know, or let's have some safety meetings, or let's get some training. They say, we haven't got time for that. We haven't got any money for that. Safety's number 1 from now on. Just you guys listen to me. And nothing happens, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And then, quite often, they have a significant emotional problem, you know, a significant emotional event. At a bakery whose compensation rates had been running $300,000 a year, the insurance company came in and said, you owe us $1 million for the next year. How many would agree if you were a small business that would be a significant emotional event? Because that was all the profit they planned to make the next year. Completely wiped out their profit structure. Here's what happens. Say it hits the fan. First thing most of them do is call in the engineers. And engineers are great people. They come in and they paint signs around everything, you know, and they actually start restructuring your plan a little bit to make it safer, and they do great things. And here's what happens. The number of injuries comes down. How many of you ever heard of ergonomists? Ergonomists. They study motion and the way you move and all of this stuff, and they do great things. You know, they can change your workstation a little bit, make your chair higher or lower or whatever, and they do great things. So accidents come down. How many know there are specialists on equipment giving you the right hearing protection and eye protection and knee protection and guards and things like this, keeping you out of the guillotines, things like that. How many of you have encountered equipment like that save, prevent? All this stuff works. Everything. Training. Training is one of the most powerful tools you have for cutting number of injuries. Everything like this. All works like this. Enforcement of rules. Every rule I've ever read in the railroad industry was written in somebody's blood. Isn't that true? They write the rules after the accident, and then they try to prevent it. So somebody has to get killed or injured, then they come in and they write a new rule. So rules generally make sense, and when you enforce rules, you generally... Now, here's what happened. Most people hit a wall right here. They're trying to hit a golden goose egg where nobody gets hurt. Nobody. No injuries. The incident rate is way down. No injuries. No property damage. You don't throw your money away with no return. So here's what happens. They hit the wall. They don't know why, but before they get really perfect, outstanding, they hit a wall. Some of them bounce so hard when they hit that wall, they go right out of sight, worse than they ever been before. Some of them just piddle around here, bouncing back and forth like this here. And they can't figure out, why can't we have that major breakthrough? Why? What's the secret? I traveled to DuPont, a couple of their plants, and DuPont Chemical, where they had an outstanding record, different places. And I keep my eyes open. I travel through the plants. I found one thing that those people that have these outstanding, continuing no-injury records, some of them lie. One guy at DuPont, he said, they kind of fudge on their records a little bit, He said, actually, they had at one of their coal plants, they had a guy fall from a scaffold 6 stories high. And by the time he hit the ground, they had him transferred to a different company. So show on there. Whew, that's fast. That's what you call claim management. Yeah. Another thing is medical management. What kind of doctors you have, how good they are, how close in touch they are with the environment, that kind of thing. But most of them are pretty darn honest on their records, and they do have this. I found one thing that each of them has that was significant. I'll tell you about it in a minute. 10.5 years ago, my wife Ruthie came home, and she said, Art, I got a lump. And I thought she was talking about me, but she wasn't. She said, I've got a lump on my breast. And I said, that's okay, honey. We'll go to the doctor. And a lot of women have lumps, and they don't mean anything. And so we went to the doctor. He said, well, we'll do a biopsy on this. And it was malignant. She had cancer of the breast. And he said, well, we'll do a mastectomy. And as long as the cancer isn't in your lymph system, you could live to be 100 years old, and you can get a prosthesis, and nobody will know the difference. And so they did the surgery, and it was in her lymph system. And so she went through hell with chemo. How many of you have had that in your family? The chemo process, and a horrible thing. And after that, after 6 months of chemo, she showed up negative, and everything was great. We went along for 3 years. And then she came home. She's got a lump on the other side. And this time it was just a tiny lump. We went to the Cleveland Clinic, had the best doctors. They said, we'll do a lumpectomy, which is just a partial amputation. And things were great for 3 years. And then she came home and said, I got a lump there again. And she hadn't been feeling good, and so they did a mastectomy. Started chemo, and then the doctors called us both in, and they said, you've got 5 spots on your liver, and you have cancer of the liver. And I said, what's that mean? He said, well, this is the 3rd stage of cancer, and there is no 4th stage, so you better start putting things in order. And then a miracle happened. I speak to so many audiences, and people saw my videos. We had hundreds of thousands of people praying for a miracle. And some guy called me, and he said, Art, he said, I saw your video, and he said, I don't know if I can help you, but I was sick and nobody could help me. And he said, I went to this nutritionalist. And he said, he made me well. And I took my mother. He said, she had cancer, and he made her well. And so he gave me a phone number. How many of you know when you got a terminal illness like that, there are a lot of con men out there that want to rip you off, and for $80,000 they'll do this. And I kind of suspected something. I didn't know this guy had called me, so I called a nutritionalist, and he said, I said, she can't eat. I said, she's wasting away. She's lost her hair, and she's lost so much weight she looks like she just came out of a prisoner of war camp. And she's a beautiful woman. And he said, well, I can get her eaten in a couple of weeks. And I said, what about the rest? He says, I think I can help you. And she went on this weird diet, all this nutrition stuff and everything, and it was like a miracle. She started eating. She got well. She was more beautiful than she was ever in her whole life. It was just fantastic. And I said, to celebrate this miracle, we'll go on vacation every month. And it was like a blessing. We kept getting bookings everywhere. Disney World we went to, and TWA had us in for Land Between the Lakes, and we had a beautiful cabin there. And we went to Hawaii twice, and we went to Maui, and we came to Canada and Toronto and saw great shows in Toronto. And to California and San Antonio and rode the boats, and we did it all. Then in October, I had a booking, and I spoke in the Opera House in Spokane, Washington. Got to sing in the Opera House. And then we went over to Idaho and this valley there. Most beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. We were so blessed. But Ruthie didn't go shopping on that trip. And Ruthie always went shopping. So we came home then, and it was back, and it was in her liver, and it spread to her spine, and it spread to her brain. June 22nd, 1993, Ruthie died. Now, how many would accept the fact that during that 9-year period I was screwed up many times? How many will buy into that? Sure I was. And I don't tell you that story to get your sympathy. I really don't. I just tell you that story because when I stand in the back of the room, people come up and say it's my mother, or it's my daughter. If it isn't cancer, it's a heart, or it's AIDS, or it's a million things. Or it's finding some funny cigarettes in your kid's dresser drawer. Or it's having somebody murdered down the street nowadays. In Battle Creek, Michigan. Less than a block from my house, some woman opened the door and somebody blew her brains out. It's a different world we live in today. And so when I ask how many of you are screwed up, the answer is at a given time, somebody's screwed up in your plant. Somebody's screwed up in this room right this minute. Somebody is hurting. You know what? Most accidents happen because of human error, they call it. And it isn't really just a bad attitude, it's they're screwed up. Human error. And most accidents, I investigated thousands of accidents, and usually there's two witnesses who say something like, I knew he was going to do that. You say, what? You said, I knew he was going to do that. You said, well, what did you do? Nothing. Why not? How many of you ever heard this? You can't tell him anything. How many of you ever heard that expression? Huh? You just can't tell that guy anything. You say, why? Well, how many will agree that you really can't tell some people anything? Most people. How many of you are under 40? Raise your hands, will you? How many of you guys under 40 will agree you cannot tell these old fellas anything? Huh? You might as well talk to the moon. Now, us. How many of you guys, you older guys, will agree you cannot tell these young punks anything today? How many will buy that? Sure. Yell, yeah. Yeah, sure. You can't tell them anything. And how many of you men are married? Just raise your hand if you're married. how many of you married men will agree you cannot tell women anything? How many will agree? Sure. And you women. No, really, you women here. How many of you will agree you can't tell men anything? It's just might as well just forget it. And black people cannot tell white people anything. And white people cannot tell black people. And black and white people cannot tell green people anything. They won't pay any attention. And how many of you Catholics ever tried to tell a Lutheran anything? I mean, that's just, yeah. Or any way you want to go. When you get down, if you sum the whole total of the thing up, is nobody can tell anybody anything today. So you might as well forget it, and you might as well just stand there and let somebody get killed, and then the two of us can say, I knew he was going to do that. And somebody will say, well, why didn't you say anything? You say, you can't tell him anything. Isn't that right? Might as well forget it. Yeah. We actually run into all kinds of programs that are great programs. They call them Sisters and Brothers Keeper. You know, caring for the other guy. And then what happens? You go to say, listen, buddy, you really got to put that helmet on. I mean, put the helmet on. You know, this is a hard hat area. And what do you tell me? You know, you can take that helmet and you can, I mean, that's the way a lot of people act. What we discovered is when people give permission to each other, when they actually give each other permission, and they admit the fact that I'm screwed up every now and then, and man, I need somebody looking out for me once in a while. If they just acknowledge that and they say, hey, I'll keep an eye on you, you keep an eye on me. If you see me going over my limit of stupidity, let me know about it in a positive manner. I don't mean come in and say, hey, you yo-yo. I mean say, hey, buddy, you're needed around here, man. We really need you here. Without you, you know, we wouldn't get any of this safety work done. You're an important part of the team. Will you do me a favor? Put the goggles on, put the hearing aid on, whatever it is, you know. And the guy says, yeah, thanks a lot. That's all. And here's the other thing. You also give permission that even if you're wrong, it's still okay because I know why you did it. You did it because you care about me, that's all. It's called positive interaction. Just positive interaction. Simplest thing in the world. What difference does it make? All I know is where they do it, the numbers change significantly. They change, that's all. So you make a commitment to safety, to one another, care about each other. You give permission. 3 things. You know, permission, your own commitment, and a request. You know, I promise I'll look out for you. You look out for me. It's the simplest stuff in the world. This is my 3rd time here on the Rock. Spoke at St. John twice. And I always try to visit an area. We're going to visit your area. We're going to see your beautiful fjords and go on a boat. They tell me this is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Flying in on the plane, I could see it. You people are so blessed. St. John's, I went to a park, Harborside Park there. And right at the waterfront, there's a little plaque. And the plaque says that this is the spot where Terry Fox dipped his artificial leg into the water to start his historic run. How many of you know who Terry Fox is? And I stood there and I just felt a sense of history of there's a guy that total absolute commitment to a cause. I mean, what a hero he was. And he started the run, and before he finished at Thunder Bay, he got to Thunder Bay. He had lost his leg because of cancer, and he still had active cancer, but he decided that he was going to run to raise money for cancer research. And it started, and it was kind of a quiet thing. Maybe just knew about it here in Newfoundland, and then it started to catch the wire services, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran an average of a complete marathon every day. He ran 5,432 kilometers until he collapsed in Thunder Bay. And they took him to the hospital, and shortly after that, he died of cancer. And he said something that just stuck in my mind. He said, somewhere the suffering must stop. I'm going to take it to the limits for this cause. Somewhere the suffering must stop. I hope I could instill that kind of passion, call it passion, in each one of you. What did I discover at these plants? Something simple. And they were not alike, they were different in different places, but somewhere hanging on the wall in the plants that were superstars, like the magic pill, was some kind of a document they got together and put together somehow. And it simply said, I'm signing a commitment to safety. Signed commitment. In the United States, we refer to the Declaration of Independence, where our forefathers in America signed and made a personal commitment, and many of them lost their fortunes and their families and were imprisoned and everything else, and they made this total absolute commitment to one another and to freedom. I've checked your history out and I understand you signed a Declaration of Independence yourself many years ago and made it. You did it on a much more peaceful, sensible basis than we did, I think, but you too made a commitment to your own independence. How many of you ever signed anything? How many of you are married? Remember signing that document? You know, you actually, I think it's true here, you actually signed off half of your entire wealth. The whole $12, let her ride, you know, back then. And sure. How many of you ever bought a house? How many went through the closing process? Remember signing that mortgage? Remember that? You said, how in the world am I ever going to pay for this sucker? Yeah, I remember signing it. I paid $12,000 for my first home and took out a $10,000 mortgage, and I looked at that like I thought, how could I ever pay for this thing? And now you get into $100, $150, and $200,000, and you say, how could I possibly do that? And yet it's a powerful moment when you sign that, and yet probably it's the best investment you ever made in your whole life. And when you buy a car, how many of you ever bought a car on time? How else do you buy a car? Of course, you signed the document. Well, we came up with a document that is used in many different places, and I want to share it with you. And here's what it says. It's called A Pledge to Personal Safety and to Positive Interaction. It says this: acknowledging the need for a total, uncompromising commitment to safety, recognizing the truth that we are human, we acknowledge our dependence on one another, for safety demands that we truly become our sisters and our brothers' keeper. And the practice of safety is both a personal and a mutual obligation. And here's what it says: therefore, I promise to let my co-workers know that I value and appreciate their safe actions. When I observe them doing something unsafely, I will communicate my concern and positively interact in a caring, tactful, respectful, and honest manner. In return, I hereby give my permission and request that all my co-workers and managers interact in that same positive manner with me. I promise to accept that praise and concern for what it is, an expression that my friends and co-workers care. Let us draw our inspiration from the words of that great Canadian Terry Fox, who said, "Somewhere the hurting must stop. I'm determined to take myself to the limit for this cause." Could I get you to put your John Hancock on that baby for me? Let me get something to put under it. I get you to put your name? Would you ever do that for me? Just, I hope every one of you will make a commitment like that. When I pass this thing out like that, I always wonder what's going to happen. When I hand somebody a pen and say, would you put your John Hancock or you John Henry or John Bull or whatever, would you do that? But remember the first time I ever did it, I handed it to some guy. I had no idea what would happen. And the first time I did it was Alabama Power, and everybody signed it. And then a miracle happened. We happened to make a video of that, like we're making today, and the union people saw it, and they insisted that the video be taken out, and 10,000 people signed it. And since then, everywhere we've taken it, same things happen. And then when they hang it on the wall, something good happens. My wife Ruthie and I used to be nuts about Clydesdale horses. How many of you ever saw a Clydesdale horse? You know, beautiful, big animals. They're really wonderful. And we would go to the circus or whatever it was, a county fair or something where they had the Clydesdale marching. And then they had them in the tents where you could come and look at them. And there'd be horse poop all over, and we'd step in it and walk around it. And she just loved them. And then I spoke for Budweiser one time. How many of you know Budweiser Brewery? And I spoke for them, and they had a huge, they didn't pay me, but they let me jump in the vat for a half hour in there. So they had a huge bronze statue of this Clydesdale horse, and this guy knew all about him. And he said, you know, Art, he said, one Clydesdale horse, are powerful animals, one Clydesdale horse can pull a load of 9,000 pounds all by itself. 9,000 pounds. And he said, you take two Clydesdales, put them side by side, they don't even know each other, but just something magic happens, just put them next to each other, two Clydesdale horses can pull a load of 20,000 pounds. However, you take two Clydesdale horses and you train them to work with one another, just like you have in this here, where you have union and management, your safety team, everybody working together, just like those Clydesdales. Two Clydesdale horses can pull a load of 28,000 pounds. It's something called synergism. That magic extra plus you get in something when you get teamwork working together. And that's why you people set records. That's really the reason. And if your plant isn't setting records, I challenge you to listen to that fellow Terry Fox and what he said and join the cause. Go flat out. We've got a couple more copies here. I hope every one of you will come forward and put your John Hancock, and then we'll put them all together into one big document. But to make it a little faster, I want to thank you for your attention. You're a great audience. God love you.